What are the scariest places on Earth currently known to man? Story 1. Boesmansgat. It barely looks like much more than a pond, yet is actually hundreds of meters deep and multiple people have died there. I read a couple of articles that, whilst fascinating, were also faintly terrifying. Story 2. The very true outback of Australia. If you're traveling, nobody expects to see you for up to a week. Nobody expects phone calls or messages, as there's no phone service. If you break down, it could take a couple of days until you are found by a passing car. And if they don't find you in time, the dry, extreme heat will kill you. You could never pack enough water to survive as long as it takes for someone to notice you're even missing. It's unforgiving and a horrible way to die. Not to mention that if you die, the heat will decompose you in a matter of days. And scavengers will scatter you, meaning your family may never know. I saw an episode of I Shouldn't Be Alive about a dude who took his younger daughter out on a little day trip and decided to take a new path into the outback. Not sure if it was very true outback at that point. He had 2 spare tires, both of which blew, and went through all of his water pretty fast. The kid was about 15 seconds from death by dehydration and heat stroke before they were found. I would never go to any of those places without a satellite phone and telling like 27 people I was there. But really, I would probably never go there, period. I'd rather go to a place that, if it kills you, at least it's fast. Story 3. This is more eerie than scary, but towns that have been flooded to make a reservoir. The idea that there are people's belongings and houses down there, at the bottom of the lake, preserved in the cold water. They did that to make Lake Lanier in Georgia. There is an entire town and cemetery under that lake's surface. Many people die in it every year, and the urban legend is that it's haunted since a lot of people die under suspicious circumstances. It's also a major source of drinking water for the Atlanta metro area. Story 4. After watching the movie The Lighthouse, I would be terrified of spending one day there. Just the idea of being on a small rock in the middle of nowhere with no communication and just one small accident from death terrifies me. There's a lighthouse on an island near Antarctica and Tasmania that records weather and a few other things. It has 2 people at any given time, and they stay there for 6 months. And the only way to contact anyone off the island is through the satellite phone there. The only way off or on is through helicopter. That just screams prime killer spot to me. My aunt has signed up for it. Story 5. Aside from the well-known places such as various death camps, prisons, and battlefields, Poveglia Island. Throughout history, it was used as a quarantine zone during the plague outbreaks. There are multiple mass graves on site. Supposedly, it was just a dying ground for the afflicted, where at some places the very soil was purely composed of rotting plague corpses. But the fun doesn't end there. Later on, someone decided to build a mental asylum right on top of that in 1922. Countless cases of observed hauntings by the patients, but nobody believed them, since they were supposedly crazy. The headmaster of the institute then later on committed self-deletion by climbing the bell tower and jumping down. Story 6. If you are afraid of dolls, mannequins, the Silent People Field in Finland. It's a field of mannequins facing the main road, and somebody goes and changes their clothes once in a while. It's really creepy in spring when the nights are still dark. In this same vein, the Island of the Dolls outside of Mexico City looks and sounds creepy as hell. You can actually visit the island if you can find a boatman to take you there. The guy who lived there became superstitious after he discovered a girl's body who had drowned on the island. He died in the exact same spot where he found the girl's body. Broken and deteriorated dolls of various styles and colors are found throughout the island, originally placed by the former owner of the island, Julian Santana Barrera. Julian believed that dolls helped to chase away the spirit of a girl drowned years ago. Santana died in 2001 of a heart attack, close to the same spot where the girl drowned. Story 7. I visited a place on a tour of World War II events around Europe that gave me absolute chills. It was in the middle of the woods. A big pit with steps cut into the side that we carefully walked down. It must have been about 20 feet deep and 50 feet from side to side. Empty, save for a single wooden post riddled with bullet holes. Horrible. But so were a lot of other places we'd been. But this one was weird. It was in the middle of a forest we'd walked through, full of birds and other wildlife. But here it was, completely still. No wind, no noise, nothing grew through the packed earth. It sounds stupid, but it was like nature rejected it. It felt poisonous. As soon as we walked away from it, all the sounds of nature started again. Freaked me out. That was 26 years ago, and I've never forgotten how it made me feel. Story 8. Antarctica, with temperatures that can drop down to negative 89 degrees Celsius. Winds up to 300 plus kilometers per hour, thousands of kilometers from the closest inhabited nation. Ultra-low population density, which the supermajority are concentrated at various camps and just a place of ice. Get lost, and you're dead. Story 9. Not really anything scary, but kind of creepy, so here goes. There's a coal mining town in Pennsylvania called Centralia. It's unknown how exactly it happened, but the mine caught fire in 1962, and the underground of the town has been on fire to this day. Basically, a ghost town with a population of like 5 people. This town is apparently the inspiration for the game Silent Hill. Story 10. Personally, the uncontacted tribes that remain on Earth scare the shit out of me, while being fascinating at the same time. The Sentinelese hate all outsiders and will try to kill anyone within range. Yet, it is likely they have never discovered fire. Everyone keeps making a thing of this particular note, so I'm just taking it out. Many others exist in South American jungles and have only been spotted by helicopter or occasional aerial sightings. I've always found that unknown aspect very creepy. Story 11. Hoia Baciu Forest in Romania is considered to be a haunted forest. Some people went missing in that forest. The shepherd who went missing with a flock of 200 sheep. Visitors of this forest also report strange feelings of nausea, anxiety, and being watched. Ghost Adventures did a show on it a few years back, and so did Destination Truth. There is one clearing that just doesn't grow trees. Soil tested fine, but it's a weird collection of stories of lights, feelings, and the magnetic field is weird. And yes, the trees grow oddly bent. It's all very weird. Story 12. Mayak nuclear facility in Russia, including the nearby Lake Karachay and the Techla River. Probably the most polluted place on the entire planet, where there have been more nuclear accidents than I'd like to count, and the authorities have been dumping nuclear waste into the lake for 50 plus years, just slowly converting it with concrete. They've also been dumping water into the river for all that time too, and it's unknown how many people living downstream might have suffered from radiation and poisoning of their water and food supplies. Storage facilities for high-level and low-level waste are essentially rotting away and neglected or poorly operated, leading to repeated criticality events and explosions over its lifetime. This place has emitted more radiation into the environment than any other nuclear accident in history, including Chernobyl and Fukushima. Story 13. The North Korea-South Korea border. Less of creepiness and more of direct danger that makes it so you will most likely die within seconds. More than likely, there have been hundreds, possibly even thousands of people that were shot or blown up in that area with their remains never retrieved. It wasn't the border itself or the views into North Korea that I found unnerving. It was just that lone train station to which barely any trains call. It's just weird how pristine and massive it is with nothing around it. Story 14. The Battleship Island, Hashima, a Japanese concentration camp for Koreans. Its name comes from its appearance. It's a small island completely surrounded by huge walls in the middle of the sea with coal mines. With the amount of Koreans forced to live there, it was one of the highest population densities in the world. You might have seen a few shots of the island, which is now abandoned, in Skyfall. The Korean movie Battleship Island also deals with this place. I strongly recommend it. Story 15. Black Mountain in Australia. Stories have persisted for years of people disappearing into the interior of the mountain and never coming out. Even the Aborigines shun it. It is believed that those who vanished most probably fell into one of the chasms under the rocks, or after entering one of these places and became lost. It is estimated only 3 in 10 would survive such falls, wandering below the Earth's surface with only groundwater streams and insects to nourish them. This minority group are referred to by tourists as outback moles, perhaps in reference to New York's underground population. Story 16. In Hawaii, there's a sinkhole whose name escapes me. Nobody knows exactly how or why, but sometimes people who swim there are fine one moment before showing signs of panic and are subsequently pulled into the depths. No visible disturbances in the water are present in these cases, and many times people are fine. The locals believe a legendary water monster lives there, and have therefore banned any and all swimming in this area. Most likely, it's a tidal whirlpool, but if this is the case, there would be visible water disturbance on or near the surface, and the disappearances in a smaller area of the lake. However, this is not the case from what I hear. Story 17. The Ocean. We know more about other planets than we do below the surface of the ocean. There are an estimated 100,000 to 10 million species that are undiscovered. Point Nemo, also known as the loneliest place on Earth, is located in the ocean. The closest island is the Pitcairn, which is still 2,700 kilometers, 1,677 miles, and inhabited by approximately 50 people. If you were at Point Nemo and the International Space Station were to pass over you, they would be the closest people to you. Not only is the ocean lonely and cold, it also has lots of pressure. If you were to be placed at the bottom of the Mariana Trench with no protection, you would be crushed with the force of about 50 jumbo jets, which is around 25 million pounds, or 12,500 tons. Story 18. Shipwrecks in general. I scuba dived next to one, and the thought that hundreds of people had drowned there, plus the open sea, the current, and the fact that we could only see 3 meters ahead of us was terrifying. Would recommend nonetheless. Story 19. Probably not the scariest on Earth, but to me as an Ohioan, the many dead and dying towns we have here can be pretty surreal. Places where manufacturing and mining jobs dried up, and most or all of the inhabitants just left. Many still have a few people living there, often 50 or less. In these places, it can feel like you've gone back in time. There are no chain stores of any kind, only old-timey mom-and-pop places. Maybe a general store, a bar or diner, a post office if they're lucky, and that's it. All of the vehicles are pristine 50s and 60s models. The farm equipment may be from the 1920s or earlier. 90% of the homes and businesses are abandoned, if not more. You may also hear an accent not spoken by anyone other than those few people. I've been to tiny towns here where everyone sounded like they'd been transplanted out of Boston to some middle-of-nowhere Ohio town. Due to isolation, stuff like this can happen where an area has so little exposure to other areas that they retain an accent through generations that technically shouldn't exist locally. It's kind of like a founder effect. Look up Tangier Island, Virginia for a great example. Visiting these places can be uncomfortable because the few remaining residents are often downright hostile to outsiders. Story 20. The Hot Tub of Despair. Scientists have discovered a lake in the Gulf of Mexico. Everyone who enters this pool at the bottom of the sea will suffer horribly. The water in the lake within the sea is about 5 times as salty as the water surrounding it. It also contains highly toxic concentrations of methane and hydrogen sulfide, and can thus not mix with the surrounding area. For animals and people who swim into it, these toxic concentrations can be deadly. Only bacterial life, tube worms, and shrimp can survive those circumstances. Story 21. It depends on what you qualify as scary. Places that come to mind are the Marianas Trench, Chernobyl, and if you can count it, the Kola super deep borehole in Russia. Marianas Trench is so deep it's impossible for humans to survive down there in any way, yet weird balloon-like fish manage to live down there. Chernobyl is self-explanatory. Though the radiation has significantly declined over the years, it's still a very dangerous zone, especially with the radiation mutating animals like something out of Fallout. The Kola super deep borehole was a project by the Soviets to try and break through the Earth's crust and get to the Earth's mantle. I think the size of it was only maybe a foot-wide tunnel dug straight down. But it got to the point where their equipment couldn't operate anymore because of the extreme temperatures, something like 180 degrees Celsius or some other high temperature. It was stopped with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the final depth was about 7.5 miles down. The scary part about it is that the Soviets literally dug a third of the way through the Earth's crust just to see if they could and to see what would happen, and just slapped a cover over it. Story 22. Honestly, pick anywhere in the oceans. We know less about the depths of that boundless abyss than we know about space. The thought of what unfathomable horrors lie beneath the churning waves has inspired fear since the beginning of civilization, and that fear isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Story 23. The anechoic room at Orfield Laboratories. It's the quietest room on Earth, measured in negative decibels. It may start out alright, but eventually your brain will think it's too quiet and will start hallucinating sounds in a manner of sorts. Actually, it may not be as scary, but you can go crazy in half an hour or even a few seconds. Story 24. Haunted Forest of Romania, and in that forest, a circle where nothing grows. There's anything in there from strange UFO sightings to a little girl that went missing for 5 years and then reappeared. When questioned, she couldn't remember anything between the time she disappeared to the time she reappeared. Even creepier is the circle, a perfect circle where no plants grow and wildlife doesn't go into either. No explanation as to why things don't grow, and very strange myths and legends. Personally, I'm not someone to get wigged out on much, but every time I think, hear, or see pictures of this site, the hair on the back of my neck stands up. Every time. I get weird vibes from that site just looking at it. Story 25. North Korea is pretty scary. If you ever decided to travel as a tourist there for whatever reason and make a disrespectful move, you can kiss your life goodbye. Perfect example is Otto Warmbier, who got 15 years for attempting to steal a banner from a hotel. He fell into a coma while incarcerated and never came out of it. Story 26. There is an island off the coast of Italy, Sicily area I believe, that is considered to be so haunted and dangerous that the Italian government has banned people from going there for their protection. It's a crime to step foot there. The place was used as a dumping ground for victims of the bubonic plague, which was the site of severe massacres, and to top it all off, had a psych ward on it in the early 20th century. The doctors were notorious for ending patients in gruesome ways. Now, the place is considered a massive health hazard because it has fostered so many diseases in its time, on top of it being listed as one of the most haunted places in the world. If that's not scary, then I don't know what is. Story 27. The Hellfire Club is a place in Fairhouse, Dublin. It's a big abandoned lodge at the top of a mountain, and it's extremely eerie. It might not seem strange, but when you're actually in it, the atmosphere is really creepy. To make it worse, they recently discovered a buried tomb. Story 28. Fort Saskatchewan. This is a small town with big industry close to home. Despite having terrible air quality, they still want more petrochemical plants. The neighboring counties place their petrochemical plants on Fort Saskatchewan's borders. Part of this is due to proximity to highway and rail lines. Regardless of the economic stimulus, The fort looks like Mordor at night. I used to be able to see Aurora Borealis from my parents' driveway. Now, I just get the creepy orange glow of way too much light pollution. It's scary because the toxic soup of all the petrochemical plant emissions can't be good at all. Story 29. There's a town here in Oklahoma. I believe it's called Pitcher. It was an old mining town, and as a result of the mining, a lot of heavy metals ended up in the soil and water and caused a ton of sickness on the kids living there. Eventually, it got so bad, the state decided to close the whole town down. Now, it's abandoned and is way too dangerous. I used to want to visit, but after doing research, it basically is never a safe trip. You risk a dry day where the soil is toxic and you inhale lead, or a rainy day where lead-filled mud cakes cake your ankles and shins and you absorb lead. Fairly scary. I guess to this day they are still checking in on residents to see how they are and to experience any serious side effects. Story 30. One time, my grandma told me about one of her cousins who explored a lot. Somewhere in the south, there was a sinkhole that opened near a hill or tall mound of dirt. He went inside of it using a pulley and found that it was a cave that had collapsed. He explored for a while until he saw something in the water. He screamed and got out of there as fast as he could. When his friends that were up top pulled him out, he was shaking and crying. They asked him what was wrong, but all he kept saying was something about there being no God, but didn't explain what he had seen. The state eventually filled the sinkhole, which usually doesn't happen, especially in the middle of nowhere. Every time someone asked him what he saw, he would say he couldn't explain. Story 31. Not so scary as creepy in my opinion, but there's a chapel in Portugal where the walls, pillars, and parts of the ceiling are lined with human bones. There was a larger building, church, built around it to preserve it. So the chapel is just a medium-sized room, but the amount of bones is still pretty awesome to look at. I went there last year and spent a couple of days there. If you're looking to just relax, it's a nice little sleepy town. Though if you're looking for more to do, I suggest taking a train from Lisbon.